Welcome back to the fourth and final week of my 30-day Houdini challenge. Every day for a month, I've been taking one randomly generated word to use as inspiration for an entirely new Houdini scene built from scratch. Working every day, I've been building up my Houdini knowledge in the hopes of improving my skills. This is it, the final batch, containing days 23 to 30. That's the full 30. I've done it. I successfully made it to the end of the challenge without missing a day. This was a fun experiment to pursue. I've made a lot of new content. I'm looking forward to going back and polishing when I have the chance. Some pieces worked, some didn't, but I got to try a lot of new things along the way. I've definitely improved as an artist, so let's get into it and break down what I've been working on this past week. Day 23. Bean. Anyone want to guess how many beans were in the jar? This one was fairly straightforward. What I did was use an RBD material fracture to break the jar and establish constraints between pieces. I then used a bullet solver to drop massive amounts of packed beans inside the jar until it was full, before saving that geo in a stash. With the beans in place, it was time to shatter the jar. Using another bullet solver, I set an animated ball to become a physics object after a certain frame and then output it as a separate object. Nice and simple. Day 24. Define. Verb. To show the form or outline of something. Every so often this challenge would give me the most abstract prompts. I think this one worked out pretty well. I went through and set up the squab to materialize by fracturing the mesh and having the pieces reassemble along their normals. Adding a mask, I was able to further control the placement of each part using their orientation. Just having the rematerialization on its own was boring, so I decided to add smoke and a crumbling surface layer. I remeshed a particle fluid surface, then started deleting polygons using the mask as a group. It adds a nice visual element on top of the base effect that gives the scene a bit more life. One final touch was a vellum soft body just for funsies. Pretty fun, but I'd like to add more of a factory setup around this. A good old squab production line. Day 25. Say, finish him. Fatality. This one would be so much easier if my character could open her mouth. I wanted to make Sindel scream attack, so I set up a pop net to produce particles using isolated edges from her lips. There are two stages in the particle phase, one pulsing in an expanding mouth shape, and the other firing a stream set to latch onto the other character. From there I added a trail node to create extra particles, and a Pyro sim to create the volume. Using a Pyro bake look, I set the density to emit light to make the energy field. I then added a geo light to make it light up the environment. I really want to come back to this one and turn it into a proper effect, but first I'll need characters with actual face rigging so that I can make her scream. It's a good start, but it's not quite there yet. Day 26. Ladder. Get me a ladder and I'll get you the moon. This one was interesting. I started by building a procedural ladder model, complete with textures, and then importing my globe, I scattered points with a texture map, then blasted away anything blue to get only the land masses. Then further reducing the number until I had only 30 points or so, I used a solver to copy the ladders into the scene. Each frame, it would add a new ladder on top of the old one, continually growing outwards, forever twirling towards freedom. To keep things from simply piling up at the start point, I set an expanding sphere to remove old points over time. It created a nice fractal effect pushing outwards until we finally reach the moon. I will need to experiment and try and get a better control over everything, but I think it looks pretty good for just starting out. Day 27. Button. Push the shiny red button. Nothing like a good old explosion sim. This one, I wanted to practice making a nuclear mushroom cloud. I started off by modeling a quick button setup with simple animation. Using an expanding sphere, I worked out the scale of my blast and did a quick lighting pass through geolight. From there, I began developing my explosion. A quick VOP setup with turbulent noise to create an animated source, points from volume, set density and temperature with a further VOPed fuel source, and presto, one explosive pyro sim. Most of it was just adjusting the setting to try and get the right look. I'm still tinkering with this, and I want to add other elements like a shockwave and building destruction, but it's a start. The wind is a bit much at the moment, but I will be trying to fix it. Day 28. Car. They found me. I don't know how, but they found me. Time to recreate another scene from my favorite movie. This was an experiment in playing around with an auto rigger. The animation is a little jerky, and I had to go in and fix the wheel direction, but it mostly works. Now that I'm on an indie license, I will need to go back and retexture my car, as well as rebuild all my time travel effects, but that can come later. For now I've thrown in a quick pyro sim just to get by. The harder part was setting up the van crash. Blasting away smaller elements, I used a for loop to create a low poly version of the model that could be used in an RBD material fracture. I set up constraints between pieces, then in a bullet sim, I launched the van into the hut to have it break apart on impact. I did try and add a deforming point surface to the van to get the proper textures, but it went haywire. I will have to continue development and sort things out when I come back to this, but for now at least I've got it started. Day 29. Flawed. All the pretty colors broken all to pieces. For this one I found a nice tutorial explaining how to make a kaleidoscope and shatter it. The surface was made using VOPs to spread colors across a segment before turning it back into a full circle and baking the texture maps. I then used an RBD, material fracture, to drive a spike through the surface with a bullet solver. The time dilation was then added by messing around with a time blend to speed up and slow down the playback rate. This one is still pretty basic right now, so I'll need to go back and make it more my own when I have the chance. But for now I have a good idea on how things work and where I'd like to get started from. Day 30. Traction. Sometimes it feels like you're fighting an uphill battle. I pulled out all the stops for this last one. I wanted to try doing something a little more complex, so this one has a few elements going on. Taking a tilted grid with a mountain node, I made my train. The next step was making mud. Using attribute transfers inside solvers, I made point groups around object interactions to raise and lower the ground on impact before gradually returning to normal. I also added a color node to make the impacts more defined. From there, I started with making a procedural wagon wheel, which I then bolted onto my DeLorean, and then, using cone twist constraints, I made it so that the car could roll, and in a bullet solver, I used an animated pop force to push the DeLorean up the hill to 88 miles per hour. I want to come back to this one and add mud sprays under the wheel, as well as splatters that stick to the car. I also wouldn't mind setting it up so that the DeLorean flies off into the sky at the end. And that's it. 30 scenes over 30 days. I can't believe I made it to the end. There were a few days where it felt like everything was falling apart, but otherwise it seems like it was a complete success. I have plenty of new scenes to work with that I'll be able to proceed with at my own pace, so I'll be able to take the time to come back and really refine things to get them working properly. And hopefully I'll be able to stay more on top of my upload schedule moving forward. Tune in next week when I'll be ranking all 30 creations according to how well I think they've worked out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.